On the Basis of Sex is a 2018 film starring Felicity Jones, Armie Hammer, and Justin Theroux. It was directed by Mimi Leder, who is mostly known for directing TV, and written by Daniel Stiepelman, who happens to be Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's nephew. The film follows our Supreme Court justice before she made the bench, from her first years at law school through the case that launched her career as a staunch equal rights defender for women. Although her life makes for an incredible story, the film itself comes across as a rather formulaic biopic. As with most biopics, there is little exploration into the more complex parts of what makes her human, and what we get is a flattened, always likable, but overall generic character. Felicity Jones does a decent job with the part she's given, and it seems to be a fairly accurate portrayal of this part of RBG's life. I guess that's a benefit of Ruth helping her nephew edit the script. It was a little off-putting to see the notorious RBG portrayed in a sexual context, but it's Felicity Jones and Armie Hammer playing her and her husband, so I'm not complaining. Their relationship is beautiful and romantic and doesn't sound too far off from reality, so that's cool. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her relative youth, is presented as playful and determined and, most of all, incredibly intelligent. There's no precedent for her being strong and arguing before the final showdown in the courtroom. Although with the utmost credit, we could grant that this mirrors the case she's given to defend. The case and the issue of gender equality codified in Supreme Court rulings has no precedent at this point, which is the major obstacle for her to overcome. Just as when Ruth argues well for this case in court, there's no precedent for her making successful arguments before this. She, like the case, is shot down by people who see gender discrimination as natural order. The strange thing is, some of the moments where her arguments fail could be considered good argumentation, just not the way Felicity Jones sells it. She comes across as a little too earnest and simpering instead of the dry-witted and unshakable juggernaut I want to believe Ruth Bader Ginsburg always was. Like, for example, in an early scene, the Harvard dean asks the 9 young women who got into Harvard why they deserve to be there over a worthier male candidate. Apparently this really used to happen. And she replies something like, "Why, to better understand my husband's work." But the way Felicity Jones says the line doesn't make it seem sarcastic at all. And this sort of earnest performance continues in every scene where Ruth needs to make a case for herself. Had she embodied a more confident and quick-witted version of the role, I think Ruth's failures would have felt more systematic than individual, systematic injustice being a major theme of the case the film is centered around. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is someone who changed this country with her opinions, her voice, and her courage, and I don't necessarily feel like this encapsulates her power. And I get the feeling that's by design. The film was very clear in wanting to focus only on this one case, a case that started her career as a lawyer fighting for gender equality, and the case that set the precedent for abolishing legal sex discrimination. It's also genius that she and her husband used a case where a man was being discriminated against based on his gender instead, even if the case was as lackluster as tax law. It shows the humble beginnings of it all, and the heart and bravery that had to be invested for her and her cause to even stand a chance. But I don't know that it was the right choice to make an entire feature-length film about. While I find Felicity Jones absolutely endearing, and she does look a bit like the young RBG, I don't know that she was the best choice to depict her in this film. Considering this was Daniel Stiepelman's first writing credit ever, he did a bang-up job. The directing isn't bad either, but I wonder if the combination of amateur screenwriter and TV movie director made for a more generic film, or if the subject matter is the problem. All in all, a movie with enjoyable individual parts to it, but nothing to set it over the top. That's my take on The Basis of Sex. See you next time!